In today's video, we're going to go over and analyse a new lore drop within Crusade. We get to mention a mission for a new paladin and a lot of insight into the path of the beast, how people can begin their passage to beasthood, and how they invaded Eire on behalf of the court. So welcome back to the trenches, and let's begin. Long before the black ships of the heretic fleet appeared on the horizon of Eire, the first stages of the plan were put in motion. Eire, the heretic sea lord, who commanded the invasion fleet, had long planned the annexation of the Emerald Isle. A superb general and strategist, as well as a powerful user of goetic magic, he was the deadliest threat to the Irish, the biggest they had ever faced in their strife-laden history. In the years preceding the invasion, the path of the beast started to stir in Eire, due to a pact Eire made with the Cult of the Moon. So we can see from that line there are several sub-factions within the path of the beast. The Cult of the Moon could perhaps something more aligned with sort of a werewolf type nature. The young Irish men and women began to disappear whenever they strayed too far into the woods when the moon was full, only to return home later screaming, their bodies carved with beast runes, some giving birth to monstrosities, others escaping to join the hidden covens in the wild. Many others willingly answered the call of the hymn of the beast and went to the wilds of the Emerald Isle, turning their backs upon humanity to escape the terrible burden of the Great War. Remote villages were raided by the developed supplicants of the beast, and crops were burned. Eire found itself isolated from the rest of the faithful nations, as more and more of their merchant vessels were intercepted and plundered. All this sapped the strength of the island nation, and the guard of the shores grew lax as the Irish struggled to contain the servants of the beast. A follower of the great infernal duke Focalor, Eire was supremely suited to his role as conqueror, for his lord commanded the winds and the waves. The demon mentioned is a goetic demon. Occult.live has the following to say: Focalor appears in the form of a man with a eagle's wings, kills men, drowns them, and overthrows warships. But if commanded by the conjurer, he will not harm any man or thing. Focalor has power over wind and sea, and has hoped to return to heaven after 1,000 years of exile in hell, and he was deceived in this hope. So you can see why it would be a very good ally for Eire. Once he felt the Irish were sufficiently weakened, the heretical sea lord gathered his ships and concentrated them into one mighty fleet, making landfall near Dublin. He achieved almost total surprise with his expeditionary force, bringing the mighty heretic artillery on land unhindered. As the Irish gathered their forces to defend their shores, Eire unleashed the next stratagem of his master plan. With an enormous blood sacrifice of captives, enough goetic magic was unleashed to open the long-dormant hellgate of the lake pagan Eire, bringing the armies of the court to support their heretic invasion forces. Pagan Eire means hole of hell, amongst other possible translations. So we now have three types of hellmouth within Crusade. The one that started it all in Jerusalem, the hellmouth in the north that moves around and is unstable, and this new and exciting temporary one, where a sleeping hellmouth can be opened with a strong enough swell of goetic magic. That opens a lot of possibilities. Where else could there be sleeping hellmouths waiting to be opened so the forces of the court can invade Earth? Caught between two forces and harried by the horrors of the path of the beast, raiding their supply columns, the army of Eire was routed and the High King fell in battle. Eire took the crown of Ireland from his severed head and claimed the island by the right of conquest. With the field army of Eire gone, the coastal cities fell to the invaders, as well as many other towns and cities. The cathedrals, churches, monasteries, abbeys and shrines of the saints were razed to the ground or converted into temples of blood. Sacrificial altars were erected where holy shrines once stood, and the black knives took the lives of those who dared to rise against the new masters of Eire. Heretical priests now taught hell's coercion in the halls, where once the joyous hymns of the holy word echoed. The Irish were reduced into fighting guerrilla warfare in their own lands, with their cities either burned to the ground or held within the hands of the enemy. The newly crowned king, Niall, moved the capital to the inland town of Kilkenny, where the high kings of old once held court. The inland city proved easy to defend as the heretic fleet could not bring its guns to bear, but this only led to more and more of the countryside falling to the invaders. The following decades saw almost all of the country taken by the heretic forces, and a huge number of refugees attempted to escape over the sea to France, Alba, and England. Many were caught by the heretic navy, and yet more sacrifices being chained to red-hot bronze pillars or sold into slavery of the court of the seven-headed serpent. Some others gave up on all their hopes and dreams, turning their backs upon humanity, and walked into the wild places to walk the path of the beast, only to return as devolved creatures to prey on those they once called their countrymen. As the war roiled across the Emerald Isle like a storm of death, it was as if a huge snake swallowed its living prey whole, while most of the world simply watched. With their fleet lost to the men in the Battle of the Blooded Cliffs, England was unable to intervene in the war, despite the obvious danger of Eire falling to the infernal powers and giving the heretics an ideal base for launching a full-scale conquest of the island of Britain itself. Only the Crown of France still sent reinforcements to support the Irish. The rest of the faithful coalition offered little more than prayers. However, the Duke of New Antioch sent his own bodyguards to aid the Irish, with a message saying that Eire needed them more than even the home of all our hopes. As a young queen, Bridget rose to the throne in 1890, after her father was killed in the front lines by artillery Witch Coven's bombardment. By this time it seemed all hope was lost. In most maps drawn in Europa, Eire was shown as part of the heretic domains, forever lost to the shadow of hell. Ignoring her advisors wisely, it seems, Bridget married Domnall, a great general and strategist, despite his low-born origin. Together they made a desperate plan to save the kingdom. As one of her first acts, the queen lifted the ancient ban on Fianna, the hunter warriors of the wild, despite the irritation of her confessor due to the many pagan ways of the Fianna. They were reinstalled. Now Fianna goes back to time when warrior bands were set about during the Iron Age and Middle Ages. These young men would be called up from Irish nobility and would be sent out into the wild and learn skills to hunt, cattle raid other clans and fight as mercenaries. Most of these young men would hold no land at that time, so you can see with that how they might be a good counter to the path of the beast. With the additional troops secured, the royal court called the clans to send what remained of their strength to take on the heretics' main forces. The Queen then wrote a letter to the Pope, asking for the Bishop of Rome to spare but a single warrior to aid the Irish as a symbolic token of his support. When the Supreme Pontiff granted the wish, Bridget then audaciously requested the services of the paladin Ancius. To the astonishment of the princes of the church, the promise was honoured and the holy warrior was dispatched to aid the beleaguered Irish. Ancius seems to be a newly named paladin, alongside Geraint of the Third Circle and Ingelier, who was slain in battle against the Black Grail hegemon, if memory serves. Undertaking his sacred quest in utmost secrecy, the paladin stormed the hellgate alone, taking only his weapon and the banner of Storagram to aid in the surprise raid. The banner name there has on it two Greek letters, one over the other, that stand as a physical representation of the cross, and so would have some power against the demons of the court. After receiving information that Zakur the Conqueror was aboard his flagship Hymn of Obscenity, love that name, a raid by the flying columns of Fianna was sent to cut off the head of the snake. How the Fianna was able to learn the heretic passwords and how they managed to fool the beast guard of Zakur is unknown, but we got some idea of that with the skills that they learned in real-world history. What is known, however, is that against all odds, the Fianna succeeded, and I'm also aware there's a lot of lore written around the Fianna, which I will have to read through to give you a better insight into them in a later video. The mighty Behemoth warship was sunk when its ammunition cache was blown up by a Fianna berserker who carried a barrel of explosives through a hail of bullets. The great heretic conqueror was killed in the explosion that took out several other battleships. Though a huge blow to Hell's forces, this alone could not have changed the course of the war. But from the south came the news that the paladin had succeeded in his mission. The irreplaceable armour of Ancius had been torn and his eye lost in battle, but the Hellmouth collapsed behind him as he emerged from the inferno, bloodied but victorious. Without the leader, and cut off from their allies of the court of the Seven-Headed Serpent, the heretic forces were thrown into turmoil. This was the moment the Irish had been waiting for. The Queen's consort led the Irish forces in a campaign that swept the invaders into the sea in a series of brilliant battles. Their losses were horrendous. more than 3/4 of the Irish forces perished before the heretics were defeated, and only thanks to the Fianna keeping the path of the beast at bay were they able to secure enough supplies to keep their army on the field. Not one of the Duke's bodyguards survived the campaign, and to this day the Irish send their expert skirmishers to aid New Antioch in the memory of their sacrifice. All in all, the invasion cost the lives of half of the population of Eire due to fighting, famine and people fleeing the island. It acts as a stark warning to the faithful and how close all are to falling into utter ruin. So let me know what you think of this lore drop. I really enjoyed it. It gives a lot of character to Eire and to the Path of the Beast as well. And with that new faction, the Fianna mentioned, and I'll be interested to see more on them in the future. And I'll bring you more on them in the future as well, as I look through their real world history to bring you a video. And if you like this video on the Trench Crusade, then why not try this one?